Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
It's good to be back, Beck.
So I wanted to do a little bit different video. It might be a little bit more in line with what, say, Ice Age Farmer or DAP 2030 would do. Just for you guys out there that never watch their channels or haven't watched their channels. Great sources of information and just great people in general. So Russia projected to dominate world global wheat exports for years to come. I found that a little bit interesting.
It is really curious how that's happening.
Everything on this planet is shifting. It's all shifting. The whole structure is shifting, but even though it's shifting and there's so much change, some things always kind of stay the same.
That's the truth right there, too, the core.
The core. And so, to share with you guys what Cindy was getting today when we were just kind of talking about things from the guides, was that it's going to appear that there's conflict and stuff going on, that there's, and there could actually be conflict and war that is coming. Yet, really, behind the scenes, it's all being worked together. The powers that be are working on this together, and at the very highest echelons, they know. There are people in the know. Of course, a lot of politicians completely don't know what's going on. The vast majority of them don't really have a clue, or they might have suspicions, but they don't really know. They don't understand that the power structure of the world is really a united power structure of sorts, underneath this. Truly, it's kind of a, we could use the word fascist because it uses a corporate structure, but there is a global dictatorship of sorts. But we see empires come and empires go. And, even the Roman Empire fell. And so remember, the death of Rome was a long one. It took a long time, as, if we were going to talk about Caesar coming to power, and that was truly, it went from, being a republic to really a dictatorship. And then, you had a series of emperors, and then you had Nero, who was fiddling while Rome burned, and the barbarians at the gates, the German and other tribal hordes that came down. But it still didn't really kill it. It just kind of morphed. The power of the church grew. It became the Holy Roman Empire. And in some semblance or form, that kept going on all the way up to the time of Napoleon, really. And then power just kind of shifted over to the British Empire and then over to the United States. But again, he who dominates the food production and dominates and controls things financially with the system will appear to be in charge. And again, it's appearances only.
Yeah, and the decision has been made. I mean, they already know what they're doing. So the rest is it's for looks. It's so that they can create more income, more money, more control. But the decision's been made.
Yeah, and as we've been saying, it's so obvious and it's out there in your face that what has this whole plague upon the land done? It's just consolidated everything. Consolidated it down into a smaller and smaller and smaller group controlling all the power, all the resources, and just dominating everything. So look to Russia to be a key player in the future as well. We've talked about them shifting the power to China. But then I have sources and people I know that, have lived in Russia and lived underneath the Soviet Union as well. And they say that ultimately, too, there will be something that happens between Russia and China, even if the U.S. loses its dominance and is taken out of the primary position of power. If the U.S. and the EU are reduced to, sub-superpower status totally, and the dominant power on in the world scene becomes those nations that are of the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And when you look at this, this is interesting. So all the crop losses, all the, tremendous earth changes, as well as perhaps the wars going on related to weather, And you have grain production in Russia at record highs this year. And the country has continued boosting its exports and extending the list of potential buyers all around the world. And so look for these changes. These changes have been going on for a while now, for those that have been watching. Algeria's state grains agency said last week it would start accepting wheat imports from all countries, including Russia. In its next tender, until now, Russia has only been able to export small amounts to the world's third biggest buyer of wheat. And the move follows Saudi Arabia opening up its market for Russian grain last year. And Saudi Arabia, by the way, was talking weapons deals with the Russians as well. And meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has been the number one buyer of weapons from the U.S. in recent years. So it truly is a tangled web. And certain zones are going to benefit from these earth changes. Back in the times, if we go back to the times of the Roman Empire, the times of, Cleopatra and Egypt. Egypt was lush, very, very lush. And actually all of North Africa was a breadbasket. And here we see the USDA, NASS forecast most South Dakota crop yields to be up significantly from 2019. So an improvement there as well. And record high world grain production for second year in a row. So, with everything going on, this is from June 8th of this year, there's record production. Okay, so I think we get to see the picture a little bit more. They are creating this picture in our minds of scarcity and of lack. There's no reason for it, really. The technology we have right now, we could do amazing things. We could more than feed the world. There can be such an abundance, an overabundance, if there was the will. And the problem is that if there was such abundance, it would take a lot of the power, the control, the profits out of the hands of the few.
Yeah, they can't have that. It's all about control. And, if you control the food, guess what? You're in control.
So with production surging by 4.4%, corn will drive world cereal grain production to record levels in 2020-2021, said the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in its first forecast of the new crops. It was the second forecast in a week of record global output as the planting season ends in the northern hemisphere. So we've heard so much about all the losses, and there have been losses. And then who is getting hit with the losses and who is having record production? My bet is it's the biggest corporations in the world that are, benefiting from increased production while the average little family farms are getting smashed. I bet you that's the case. As we see here, this is another source talking about it and also talking about the higher India forecast. In fact, it's going to be better. So India forecasts wheat output to rise 2.5%, and that was for 2019 to 2020. And here you see cereal supplies to remain ample in 2020-2021, despite this month's cut in global production forecast. Really, I think the thing that's impacted people the most has been the lockdown. Yeah. The lockdown has hurt way more than so many other factors. And again, who's it hurt? It's hurting the little people. It's hurting the average people. It's not hurting the elite. They're making more money than ever. No-till farming improves crop yield, study finds. So there's so many things we can do to improve yields. And of course, crop rotation. Look at the way the natives planted the three sisters together because they boosted each other. And so there's so many ways we can, improve the food output. Patented molecular heaters to increase crop yield. Wow, the push for solar heating, can be so beneficial for so many people, and so many people are doing it to get off grid, especially in the American Southwest, but in other areas all around the world as well. The use of solar heating to warm the ground, to improve crop yields, that's another interesting thing. And there's so many things you could do, like our friend David. He just loads bottles of water inside the greenhouse, and the sun, the energy is absorbed in the water, which keeps it warmer even overnight than it would if he didn't have that in there. There's so many ways we can improve food output. It's really ridiculous when you get down to it. It's just like, again, they have paid farmers to not produce in order to keep prices high. And, it's just another game when you get down to it. In case people don't know, the 4 countries that produce the most food in the world, as you see, China, and China also, uses, probably the most food in the world too, because it has the biggest population, and it's one of the biggest countries land-wise. And India, and again, India is similar. They need all their food for their own people, but the problem with India is so many of their own people couldn't afford their own food being produced in their country because of the poverty. And the United States, and then also Brazil. And Brazil is really a very, very rich area. 1/3 of the entire country is crop area. So, Brazil is a powerhouse, and probably will be a powerhouse in the second half of this century. And India will grow in power as well. And world beef productions, well, the United States, number 1 there by a significant amount. And then Brazil, European Union in its entirety, and then China and India. And here we see the leading countries on milled rice, and China's number 1, India number 2, Indonesia and Bangladesh there. And the biggest producers of milk, India number 1, and then the European Union, and then the US, and then Pakistan, Brazil, China, Russia. So it's interesting to see that, and this is from the USDA, and it's giving you an overview of world agriculture production, and it could be very, very eye-opening. What's really eye-opening, and I've shared this before, is what we can do on a small level. This is Kirsten Dirksen, and her channel is one of my favorites. It's all about people living in an unusual way, whether it's tiny homes, whether it's RVs, whether it's amazing little structures, yurts, earthbag homes, you name it, but also, people growing their own food. And so this is in Nebraska, in a zone that you cannot typically grow citrus. And this 85-year-old man, he simply just, what he does is he puts his greenhouse about 5 feet into the ground, and then he runs venting even farther down into the ground and then up to the surface. So it stays very warm in the winter. Doesn't matter how cold it gets out there. It stays really warm in the winter and stays cool in the summer. It's a perfect situation, and he has lemons and oranges and all sorts of citrus growing in abundance. In fact, he has way more than what he can use. So he does sell it locally, and people say his oranges are better than those that come from Florida or California. So it's amazing what we can do. This, one person here on his own property is growing so much food that he could, sell it en masse locally. Can you imagine what countries can do if they would simply follow his procedure, start putting greenhouses down into the ground, and so many different areas. Instead of doing all the fracking that they're doing and poisoning the water supply and creating more earthquake issues in the future, they could be doing this, and we wouldn't even have to fear the vast majority of the changes until perhaps we actually get that magnetic pole reversal and crustal displacement. Then, that would be a totally different story, or if we have the sun go nova with that potential or that cosmic wave that's coming in. So, in the meantime, we could be doing so much more for the world than we are. It's just a matter of finding the will.
It is. And, a lot of times necessity is the mother of invention. And it's like this guy, he had a need and he fulfilled it. And I think that's within so many people right now. And they have us kind of crippled with this illness that's going on. At least it's a perceived crippled. They want us to feel like we don't have a lot of power, but we do. And it does come within. And I believe in a lot of you. And I know that we're going to be okay if we continue to work on this together and hold each other up and just support each other.
And I do feel like part of the plan is basically shifting the power structure. So, there are going to be more issues in certain areas than other ones, because what they want to do is shift the whole entire power structure right now. And, they will obviously manufacture issues that will consolidate power, consolidate wealth, consolidate the food. We saw Amazon not shipping seeds in from other countries. Again, you could tell who's being used as part of this NWO plan to basically, again, it's fascism. It's not communism. Communism is supposed to be sharing. Fascism is all about corporatism. And just even look at communist China. Is it really communist China? No, we should be calling it fascist China, because that is what it is. They've adopted a sort of consumerism. And there's no case at all for equal sharing. Look at all I guess they're nice enough to put up camps for the Uyghurs to be reconditioned, and in fact, there's even more camps that they found recently being built for Muslims to be placed into. And is that really sharing equally? Because if you wanted to see what communism really was, and of course this is so ingrained in people's minds that they don't even understand the definition of the word. Look to the Essenes, because they lived communally. And the Essenes are a group that many believe that the historical figure Yeshua lived in and was a part of that community, where basically there was no personal property, everything was shared. Except for your clothes and a few little things like that. They just work together as a community. So we need to look at definitions of words, because words are being used in ways in which they were not originally intended. Are there corporations in China? Yeah, and in fact, in a fascist state, ultimately, the power of the state controls all the corporations, or in this case, it's really the corporations controlling the power structure, which is actually controlled by an invisible group that you don't really even see so much. So again, it's not the faces that we see. Those are actors on the stage. And again, they're giving us the script, and they're telling us food shortages and famine lie ahead. And most definitely, if we look to Africa, Africa's been pounded by floods, pounded by floods. And so, they have been decimated with their food supplies. So many areas as well. And we saw Nebraska under so much water last year with the flooding, for instance, in Iowa, and so many other areas of our middle part of the country that produces so much food. And then, of course, we have California, which is the #1 food producing state in the nation, burning up. So this is part of the plan to shift the world's food production to certain areas that will actually be doing better in these times. Some areas are going to do better, and that's because the power structure has chosen that to be the case, while other areas are going to suffer and go into a much more depressed state. But there's really no reason for this other than this is the game plan of those that we have talked about. As we look at this gentleman's example right there, there's no reason why we couldn't be doing this en masse as a nation and as a global society.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I feel like people with, a fair amount of property could actually set up on their own and actually feed smaller communities with. I think he's done a beautiful job here, and he sets a great example for what can be done on a smaller scale. Imagine if that were on a global scale. Would be crazy awesome.
Yes. I mean, we could manufacture paradise on Earth if we could. Well, we got to change the power structure. The power structure has to change, and will the greedy ones ever give up their power? Will they ever share? Doesn't seem likely. So we need to have alternative setup. We need to get out of the system. We need to come together in small groups and do our own thing, and just not go along with the status quo. Guys, thank you so much for your support on Patreon and Ko-Fi. I hope this wasn't echoey. There's really nothing we can do about it, as it's a case of them hacking in and just trying to keep the audience down. As again, it's all drama. And the first letter in drama is D for distraction. Get you looking somewhere else. Well, oh, there's new legislation that just came in. As always, guys, namaste.
Namaste.